and I hope you like Amy Mann, because this week we're talking about Magnolia. I'm Josh. I usually lead the music discussions, but this week in our Switcheroo episode, I've hijacked the film discussions and forced Mattie to watch a 3-hour and 10-minute long film by a famous coked up dude bro, aka Paul Thomas Anderson.
Might I add, in a week where she's moving?
I did not take that into account. That was not my fault. Scheduling turned out that way. And for me, I view this as sort of a precursor to our like Fiona Apple episodes, which are coming up in the next two music episodes rather. This was the one film that PTA made while he was still dating Fiona Apple, and I really wanted to capture this sort of like artistic moment. It's such a weird cultural moment for late 90s kind of cinema and art, like with both of their rises. And also there was a recent The New Yorker interview of Fiona Apple where she spilled some tea about the PTA relationship, which I think sheds a lot of light. And I guess that's what I kind of want to get into first before we kind of touch on fucking mammoth of Magnolia.
You don't touch on Magnolia. You have to take a giant fucking stomp.
You have to inhale Magnolia. And I just wanted to think about Paul Thomas Anderson, the man, the
myth, the legend.
So before we get into it, I guess to slightly endear us to him before the slightly darker segment of Paul Thomas Anderson, the man, prolific music video director, weirdly enough, and has directed some of my favorite videos. Of course, he did all the Fiona Apple videos during the When the Porn era, and in 2013, like well after their breakup, a decade, he came back and directed her video of Hot Knife.
Oh, really?
From Idler Will, which is another amazing video. They're all very good videos. He also directed Joanna Newsom's music videos for her fourth album. He did Sapakonikan and Divers, which are gorgeous. And then he worked with Radiohead all throughout 2016. He did the Daydreaming video. When it's all one shot and Tom Wilk is just like walking through places. A great video.
Sad video.
Of course it was very sad. Which of course makes sense because of his work with Johnny Greenwood in There Will Be Blood, Phantom Thread.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what happened after 2016.
Because now he's working with the most fucking boring band I've ever seen.
He's been working
and making boring videos as well.
You know what? I like the Now I'm In It video. I resent that. I like that video.
I'll be honest, I've only seen Summer Girl. And Summer Girl
sucked. Why did you watch the Summer Girl video?
Because it was everywhere. Everyone was like, this is so cool, Paul Thomas Anderson. And it really made me not like him. It really made me skeptical of
I don't know if I've seen the Summer Girl video, but I've never seen the Now I'm In It. But it's amazing.
It's just them walking around taking jumpers off. And that's the video.
Damn. Well,
like again and again, it's like a looping thing. It's weird. It's not weird, it's boring. Sorry, carry on.
Well, we're gonna have a Haim episode. You can get all of this out of your when you get to the Haim episode. Because I hate you. It's crazy. Like after Joanna Newsom, Radiohead, John Bryan, the dude just snapped, and he's been working with Haim for like the past 3 years. Like it's the longest running time he's worked with an artist. It's so wild. And these are one of the many contradictions about PTA that fascinates me. I have a thing where I can get, for short periods of time, I can get fixated on men who are like awful, but not awful enough to like legit be completely reprehensible.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have to bring up a list of men who have done things that are so genuinely horrifying that trigger warnings and whatnot. I don't want to talk about it, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean. There is a line between like toxic and bad and like actual fucking monster.
Yeah.
And I guess I wanted to talk a bit about kind of who like the kind of like he's such there's a great bit in the New Yorker article about how in Hollywood, in the industry, young male artists are basically shaped to be like auteurs, and young female artists are usually shaped to be like problems, basically, or like something to manipulate. And Fiona Apple and PTA, what makes them such an interesting couple is they perfectly dichotomize this, where they're both, in my opinion, making some of the best like art in their fields at that time. However, whereas Paul Thomas Anderson is heralded as this like auteur genius, like Fiona Apple was always viewed as like this like mentally unstable problem child of Hollywood who'd always have like breakdowns and viewed as very like neurotic and just it does speak to a double standard, I think.
It's all around weird.
Yeah, and just to dredge up like kind of so before I get to the darker side of Anderson, I do think he would have been a fun person to be around. Like I remember, like I showed you the clip with him and Philip Seymour Hoffman.
That's a lovely clip. It was really endearing.
Yeah, it's very clear that they were like best friends, like really good friends, and obviously like Hoffman saw something in him that was very like, I don't know, like they fell in love. Like it's a great story about how in The Master there's a scene when Joaquin Phoenix's character returns to the cult leader Hoffman character, right, after kind of being separated for a bit, and they just like hug and then wrestle on the ground with the hug, and it's like it's very like visceral men showing love to each other scene. And when asked about it, Hoffman said that's actually just something me and PTA used to do. We used to kind of get into these hug fights, which is very like adorable.
That's really sweet. Yeah.
But then there's also there's this sort of I think he's calmed down now. It sounds like he's matured a lot. And Fiona Apple said, with him on the Hot Knife video, it felt like maybe he'd grown up a bit, or I don't know, become a more peaceful person.
Okay.
But there is also this like egomaniac, weird temperament side of Anderson.
Yeah.
Which I think I showed you the clip of. There's two clips from the documentary. What's it called again?
The Moment.
The Moment, yeah, the Magnolia documentary. Where like one of them is, I love the clip of him sitting in a little crane as he orders for frogs to be dropped from the sky, and the origin. And did you have the frog thing spoiled for you before?
No, I didn't, but I know. Yeah, I got it. I know what it means and such now, but luckily it just happened to me.
Oh,
so that was nice.
Because I had the exact same experience. I like such a double take when I first saw this. I was like, "What the fuck is going on?"
Yeah.
But, and spoiler alert, I guess. I really hope if people listen to this, like, please watch Magnolia before you watch this, because it's there is some stuff in this film that I think like it really hits harder if you don't know it's coming.
Yeah. I feel like Magnolia is also one of those older, very well-known films that not everyone has seen. It's not like Goodfellas or Pulp Fiction or Fight Club. Yeah. So you can actually, I feel like there could well be people listening who haven't seen it. And if you are, just watch it first.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what meaning of the frogs you're bringing, because I know there's one reading of it as like biblical, which I haven't really fucked with that much, because like Anderson himself kind of says I wasn't really going for a biblical thing of the frogs. Obviously there's the Exodus stuff, but yeah, I just didn't really follow that. But I want to hear what your interpretation of like how it could be potentially read as biblical, because I didn't really delve that much into that. But Anderson commented that the frog thing was actually about his dad when his dad died, and you got the phone call and they told him his father was dead. He had a real like. He said it was like you're telling me that frogs are falling from the sky kind of feeling, like something so absurd and like surreal, and it felt I'm sure anyone listening to this, if you've had days where like something genuinely horrific happened, and it's just that one day just feels out of joint with everything else. Like it just nothing feels real for a bit, right? And yeah, that's what he's trying to, I guess, get across. So this idea of like him going through this experience, and the only way you can externalize this like neuroses is by like ordering every day on set for frogs to fall from the sky, and you just have to keep watching frogs fall from the sky. There is something beautiful, and like this is the artist, the director, but then there's also like the uglier side of kind of the ego of Anderson, and I'm sure of many young drugged up directors at the time. Of like you watch the clip that well, first of all, he clearly was a huge cocaine addict. Like, I think that's evident from the film. There's lots of stuff in it about drug addiction and shame around it, but also there's the way he like interacts with the people in his life, even from that documentary, which is like, I mean, I'm sure he had the power to like curate what went into the documentary. So the fact that like these parts are seeping through, like there's a bit in the documentary where a couple of actors from the film, Julianne Moore and William Macy, were talking about like when they got the script, they were like, "Oh yeah, it's really good, man, but it's pretty long. Like, are you sure about the length of this film? Like, I'm sure they had worries about it might be hard to fund, it might not make the money because it's you can't it's really long.
The longer the film is, the more expensive generally.
Which and he just like went off with them, or like he's like, "Oh, fuck
it's really funny clip.
Okay, you don't fucking know. You just shut the fuck up. You know. And like you could just picture this guy like jittering and like like in his head about what he's doing. And then but there's also the clip with Fiona Apple, which to tell the viewers what happens in this clip, I'll put all these links in the show notes. Don't worry. What it's essentially like a weird sketch of Fiona Apple playing the personified version of Magnolia, and Paul Thomas Anderson like working out his frustrations and insecurities about the film onto Fiona. And I first watched this with like no context other than having seen Magnolia. And it was genuinely like really unsettling, and
it's weird. It's hard to watch.
It is hard to watch because he seems really coked up, and she's kind of like going along with the joke, I guess. But it's mainly like he's grabbing her and kind of the way he's snarling at her. It feels really horrible and like aggressive, and
there's something so coercive about it.
Yeah,
something, and I think it's just the inherent like. I think when you just see a woman being controlled by a man like that, and she seems so empty. Like you barely even see her like face in the entire clip. She's kind of keeping it hidden, and so it just has this really somber, quite troubling feeling to it. I really didn't like the feeling I got from watching that, to be honest.
Same, especially as someone who like I'm more of a fan of Apple than Anderson, and I got into Apple way early in my life. Like she was like, man, I loved her so much as a teenager, and she got me. It felt like really horrible to watch that video, and there are some funny bits in it. Like I like the bit, get into the closet with your length and your frogs.
And, the monologue like, line is quite funny.
Oh yeah, when your friends tell you the monologue isn't too long, that they're lying to you. They just feel bad for you because you're putting all like it is like he's a funny person, but he is just like he's also very scary.
I feel like he's the guy at the party who you're like, oh yeah, it was fun to meet him. And then maybe like he seemed like a cool guy, and then maybe like a week later, you hear something from someone who knows him that's like really troubling, and you're just like, oh,
He seems like the funny guy who kind of goes too far.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll go through like for the listeners at home, story time. We're gonna go through the narrative of their relationship that Fiona Apple kind of talks about in the New York interview, because I just think it's so fascinating and really contextualizes like this era of Anderson in a weird way. And and it was the reason she kind of gave this kind of like account of it is she said that like after they broke up, she didn't want to really talk bad about him because she knew the media would spin it as like bitter Fiona Apple chats shit, you know, like, and she just wanted to like leave it, you know. And so I guess it's been like more than a decade, like, you know,
it'll probably be okay.
Yeah, he's got like a family now with friggin' Maya Rudolph.
Yeah, which is a fucking step down, my What to like pit women against each other.
Oh man, well,
I'm kidding.
I liked her in Bridesmaids. She was good at Bridesmaids. But yeah, like I mean, sorry. But I mean, obviously, like they've both moved on with their lives, and hopefully Anderson's a better person now. Hopefully, he's a good dad. I mean, he made a whole film about dad, so hopefully, he learned from it. But yeah, so like it's almost like some of the scenes she paints in this interview are like so like filmic. Like she accounts the first time they met, she was doing a Rolling Stone shoot in 1997, and the article describes her hair fanning out like Ophelia. And the first words she apparently so Fiona Apple's 20 at this time, Anderson's 27, and apparently the first words she said to him were, "Do you smoke pot?" She starts like, I can picture that happening in like a Boogie Nights type of film. It's like the kind of quirky, endearing beginning of a love affair, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and then after this immediately shit gets like really weird and sketch, right? Where Anderson like followed her to Hawaii. Like he just showed up at Hawaii.
What
I like
the
met
fuck?
I guess called her, I met with her in the lobby. And you can kind of see how he is quite mansplaining, condescending. Where she records one of the things he said to her was, I remember going to meet him at the bar in the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, and he was laughing at me because I was marching around what he called my determined march to nowhere. There is this like undermining constantly happening in very soft and weird ways that, from what Fiona's been comfortable to share with us, is very obvious and clear. And you know, she wanted to open up about what it was actually like because she felt like lots of her fans were kind of romanticizing the relationship in retrospect, and she just wanted to set the record straight, I guess. So that you know, but
good for her.
But this brings me to my first point about like, I don't think artists should be read as completely biographical, but sometimes it is really fun to do that. And I really feel like PTA's films, what's been so weird for me is like where someone like Tarantino, who is very sus in his normal life, his films are very sus. Whereas every Paul Thomas Anderson films, I can't explain it, but they're like better people than Paul Thomas Anderson.
Because like, you've seen all of them now, right? Haven't you?
Yeah, apart from Hard 8, which was the first one. It's like his bottle rocket. So I'm going to get to that eventually. But
fair enough.
I've seen the rest of them. Yeah.
But that's bizarre. Because this film is like, I don't think we're getting to opinions quite yet, but then it's not perfect, but it's not Pulp Fiction. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. I think what's so odd about learning about Anderson as a man is the way he writes his films. It was really, they're very focused on men, but there's this real idea of this sensitive man and criticizing toxic masculinity and you know, trying to change the narrative of how we view men in cinema. And his films are very sensitive, very contemplative, and I really feel like they're like, I've argued before, sometimes someone can make art better than them, and I feel like Anderson is someone who makes films that are better than he is, or maybe what he aspires to be like but fails in his life. Like and Punch Drunk Love is a great example of this, where like the main character Punch Drunk Love, played by Adam Sandler, is one of those like sympathetic, heartfelt characters like I've seen in a film. Who has like anger issues, and in my opinion it's very heavily like autism coded, and the love story with him and that character, the female character in that film, feels very like earned and like wholesome. But it does have this plot point where he like goes to Hawaii to see her, and in the film it's framed as like she kind of wants him in Hawaii, but he's got his like weird neuroses that prevent him from going. So him going was like kind of a him letting himself like be open to this woman. But to knowing that's like drawing on Anderson who did it, but in a way more like creepy and horrible way, and also that's just really heartbreaking. And there's also this thing about once she had to stay at her like uncle's because Anderson lost best screenplay for Boogie Nights. He lost it to Matt Damon and Ben Affleck for Good Will Hunting.
They wrote Good Will Hunting.
Maybe, maybe they didn't. Maybe I'm just. You can look it up, kiddo.
No, I don't doubt you. I'm just surprised.
Now I have to look it up. I have to know.
I'm looking it up. Don't worry.
Who wrote Good Will Hunting?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. Damn.
Sorry.
Yeah. So he got really upset and like threw a chair across the room.
Yeah.
And Apple's quoted as saying, "Fuck this. This is not a good relationship."
Nice one.
And I mean, like, and again, this reminds me of the many of the characters in these films who are like these men who struggle with like anger, and it's always portrayed in a really tender way of like, this is bad, and they need to learn to be better.
Yeah.
And so in the sense, so it's not like Tarantino where the men in his films are so fucking horrible, and there's no like real critique of them happening.
There's more interesting conversations to be had there as well, because I'm so sick of conversations about separating art from artists, mainly because of conversations that you can have about Paul Thomas Anderson and the relationship between like obviously films are collaborative efforts through and through, but at the same time, I think there's a lot to be said about his auteurism and how wrapped up in the films that he makes are, despite being so difficult with him. And to me, that's just infinitely more interesting than, well, it was the 90s and Tarantino, you know, he just, you know, like, he said the N-word in the film, he didn't say it in real life. You know, like, that's the conversations about art and artists that we should be having, not fucking, like, unless you're being like, fuck this person, you know, in which case, fair enough. But if you're having conversations about art and artists just where you can enjoy a piece of shit's movies, like, just have more interesting conversations. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, like, this is a really great case study of how interesting it could be to think about how an artist like views himself.
Yeah.
Like, and like how that reflects on their work. So I guess that's what, like, one of the things that fascinated with me about Anderson and how I could kind of be so like on edge about this guy, but for some reason find his films utterly compelling and beautiful and moving and affecting, and that is so fucking confusing for me. So of course I had to watch all of them.
Except Hard 8.
Except Hard 8. But again, it's like Bottle Rocket. It's not,
It's not PTA. Like, I don't think anyone says, remember 1990s PTA? Fucking Hard 8. Crazy shit.
Yeah, if you ever meet someone who gives you shit for not having seen Hard 8, they're not your
your friends will say it's fine you haven't seen Hard 8.
Maybe we'll do a Hard 8 episode one day.
That'd be fucked up.
Joking, we probably would.
Imagine doing wasting a Switcheroo. I've never seen Hard 8, by the way. I just man.
Well, anyway,
that's the Hard 8 noise.
That brings us to Magnolia, 1999. I guess before I start, I guess I'll just ask Mattie, what's your history with Magnolia, with Paul Thomas Anderson?
So, just to expose my dad real quick. So, the only Paul Thomas Anderson film I've ever seen is Boogie Nights. And my dad's a lovely guy, by the way. Like, I'm not. Please don't think ill of him for this. But when I was like 11, I watched a lot of movies with my dad as a kid, and one time he's a bit wacky, and then he was just like, let's just put on Boogie Nights, and I was like, okay. And so I watched Boogie Nights at age 11, and as a result, I can't remember a fucking thing about it. Because I was saying earlier to Josh that I think I knew I wasn't meant to be seeing it, so, and especially with being there with my dad, I kind of blotted it out / didn't really pay attention. And genuinely, I don't have much of it. I don't have any history with PTA because I think around the time that I wanted to start watching his movies, there was a Punch Drunk Love showing at one of my favorite cinemas in London, and I was maybe gonna go. And then the Summer Girl video made me so angry that I didn't buy a ticket. This is real. I'm not kidding. This is an excuse. And so that's why this is my first proper Paul Thomas Anderson film.
That is insane. How fascinating. I guess, yeah, so like my history is like really oddly, my history is also in Paul Thomas Anderson fashion, very like maternal history, in terms of like all of his films are family, right? Or at least lots. And so my earliest memory of seeing a PTA film was I Phantom Thread was coming out, and that was like 2007, right? 2017, rather. And I remember like that was a time I was seeing lots of films in the cinema, and I was getting into like more artsy films, quote unquote, and that was coming out, and I was like, oh, I've never seen a PTA film, and they're meant to be good. So, Mum, do you want to go see Phantom Thread with me? And like, went to the cinema, completely blown away. I thought it was like a phenomenal film. Still my favorite PTA film to this day, and oddly a good film to watch with your mum. I think it's a good mum film. it's got like fashion. It's got Daniel Day-Lewis. Like, it's just good mum vibes. Like, there's long, loving scenes of him just like making dresses, which is like, you know, my mom was really into clothing, and like it was a period piece. You know, it was a romance, but it was kind of, you know, it was a bit edgy. You know, bit edgy. It wasn't a straight up romance. You know, had some you know, some edges to it, and it was just a great time. It was,
dude, it was totally a cube.
Well done, Mattie. So yeah, and then after, like, you know, I watched Magnolia a year ago, which would have been like a couple of years after seeing Phantom Thread. I enjoyed it back then. So yeah, so kind of a similar history to you, but definitely like more personal, I guess, and more frequented. And I actually remember his films. And I guess before I jump into like asking like kind of what you thought about the film. So this is my second time watching this film, and I guess to the first time I watched it, I feel like I watched it in like really weird condition where I idiotically I was invited to like go to like a party, and it was like the night before I left London for uni, right? And I was like, okay, I can watch a 3-hour film before I get to this party. I can do that. So like it was just weird, like I couldn't pause the film because I had to finish it before I had to leave for the party, right?
Yeah.
So it's this weird, like, intense, like, experience. And I was in a really good mood as well, which I don't think helped, because I think some of the emotional beats of the film didn't entirely land, because I was just too jazzed.
You were too good. Yeah.
I was in such a great mood. But I do, and I remember, like, looking back at my old Letterboxd review, I gave it a 7 out of 10 when I first watched it.
Yeah, I remember seeing that at the time, actually.
Yeah, I won't read the whole thing, but you know, I did think it was a very like hysterical and emotional, and a great kind of thinking about like catharsis and you know, themes like that. But I guess, and you know, I said all the normal good film things, but I guess one of the things I felt let down originally by is I felt like individually the narratives like on their own maybe aren't as exciting as they could be. And now I think my opinion's actually changed on that.
Okay.
But so for my first time watching this, I really felt like it came together nicely. But I felt like, I don't know, I felt like I was expecting a bit more kind of with each plot line. I almost like I was viewing this as like a short stories movie. But yeah, I guess, how did it hit you? This 3-hour and 12-minute mammoth, this overly ambitious film thought up in 2 days in a cabin where PTA was scared to go outside because of a snake, and he just wrote this entire fucking film because he's insane. How did it hit you?
That's real.
No, that's from the documentary. That's real.
Wow. Okay. I won't mince my words. I think it's incredible. I think I'm very pleased you brought up the sort of cohesion aspect of the film, because I had that in the back of my mind while I was watching this. I did legitimately think if any of these stories were being portrayed linearly and perhaps in an anthology film, because this is multiple different stories, it's not an anthology movie, and not just because they all intersect, but because of the way they're edited together. They're edited intermittently. But what makes this so powerful is the fact that they are being told together, and I think it's kind of not reductive. I think it's a little bit reductive to take those stories apart from each other. Not just because the film very literally at the start with the narrator says this is a film concerned with the coincidence and the intersection that there's, but also just because I think you have to take movies as they are. I think, like, if you have to take a film apart into its constituent elements to dislike it, then you're not looking at the bigger picture. And for me, films are always about the bigger picture. And so to get onto the bigger picture, I think...
Well, just to pause, I really agree with what you just said.
Yeah.
I was being a very snide, shitty, overly critical person at 19, and you're completely right. It is a low ball move to say this film is not as good as it could be because what it wasn't trying to do, it didn't do well.
No, I could. Right. I actually brought it up because I could hear that's where you were going. I didn't think you still felt that way. But I think what I want to do is make this about the bigger picture, because that's what it very vehemently is trying to do. And I think what this film ultimately does is provide massive amounts of pathos in space, essentially. And what this really made me think about, for me, was very much how stagnant life can feel, and how a single moment can be blown up into a seemingly infinite space. You have so many stories happening at once here, all intersecting in different ways, and yet this film feels so fast. There's such a lightning the bottle feeling to it. I think a large part of that is the craftsmanship, but what that craftsmanship achieves is essentially a blueprint for how to address life. I don't want to get into the frog kid. Sorry,
yeah, save that for part two.
for part two. But I think this film, what this film does for me is it addresses and accentuates how I feel about how I want to address life. And that's why I loved it. So yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I like what you said a lot about the stylistic, like especially like in comparing it to I'm thinking of ending, which I won't reveal my thoughts about it yet, but I mean that episode technically has already come out actually. Anyway,
yeah. We're fucking with time here.
They can't see behind the curtain. That film is like only 2 hours long, which is meager compared to this huge running time. And that film only really deals with like 4 characters. And 2 of those are only in it for the first half. But yet that film feels insanely fractured and difficult to like rein into one cohesive like thing. Whereas this, even though it spans across, I'd say at least 9 major characters, and it's 3 hours and 20 minutes long. The first time I watched this, I was blown away by how fast it went by, man. And it feels so cohesive and easy to follow, and not all of the themes are like neat and tidy. Like, I think you have to do a bit of legwork to kind of fit these characters together. Like, it wasn't as simple as, and this character met that character, and because of that, this happened. Because of that, that happened. Like, some characters are more disconnected than you'd expect, but just it feels so tight. Like, as a narrative, it flows so well, and it's so easy to take this whole. And I think if Anderson made this film today, like with his newfound maturity and like experience as a director, this would be legit like one of the best films ever made. Like 10 out of 10. Wow. But I think because this is like his third film, and it might have been his most ambitious film he's ever made.
Yeah, definitely.
When it falls over, I can't even really fault him that much, because it's like, shit, man. I don't think you're ready for this film yet, because it's so ambitious, what he tries to do here. But I agree. He really does pull that off, and I think it was, especially for me. One problem I had with Boogie Nights is I think there was lots of Scorsese worship in that film, and it felt like an Anderson film, but it really felt like a bit sycophantic. It felt like he was very much aping his favorite filmmakers. And I think while there is lots of Scorsese in this film as well, with the long tracking shots and whatnot, I do feel like this is really the first time he's kind of coming closer and closer to his voice that he'd found later on.
Yeah.
So like you said, really cohesive, and it hit me a lot harder this time than it did last year. It really hit me quite hard.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that it hit you, because I think what I really needed to see for like in a film, just on my own side, was just something genuinely very melodramatically emotional. And I think that's what I was probably most surprised by watching this, was how honestly genuine it was, and very digestible, I would say. We were kind of chatting about this before, but I think what makes it so redeemable as a 3-hour film, and why so many people don't turn their nose up at it, like they do at some other stuff, is because ultimately it not only justifies its length, but it never really poses like it needs to be a 3-hour film. It never has a sort of sense of pretension around it. It's such a to go to the introduction, just like the introduction is so utterly charming in framing how it was. I don't know why, but I was so moved by it. It moved me to tears. The introduction was just so artfully put together.
Do you mean the introduction of the characters, or the opening monologue? The
introduction of the characters, not the prologue. Not the prologue. Yeah. And I do agree with you. I wouldn't say this is like one of the best films ever made.
I was wrong. This is probably one of my favorite films now.
Wow.
But I just mean in terms of, I think universally the world would view it like as one of the greats. Like, yeah. If it was made of that 2020 Anderson brain, This is so ambitious.
This is up there with The Lighthouse for me, in terms of films we've reviewed on this podcast. And I think I could just go back to the sort of simplicity of it. I think it's just one of the more simple things we reviewed, and it's really lovely to have this in our sort of backlog or discography, I guess, because it's so digestible. And I think that's what struck me about Paul Thomas Anderson in this film, is that you can see him so clearly, and it's that there is very much this feeling of the outsider in this film for me, just because in contradiction with what we know of him in his private life at this time, there's so many characters that it feels like these are all different aspects of our director looking in at society, because they're like, every single one of these characters is alienated in some way from either their past or from a meaningful connection to someone they should be connected to, or just from their job or society. Like you have Jim, who's like ostracized as a police officer because he's a bit of a tool. You have Stanley, the boy expert, but he's kind of different from the rest of his kids, and he's not like his dad because he's so smart. And Frank, whose horrible upbringing has made him grow apart from just like honestly the bare tenets of being human, because like I genuinely do I think there's obviously a redemption arc there in this film, but just I think with these, if we talk about these people in real life, which this film is not, so I'm not going to talk about the characters in this film as though they are in real life, but just on incels, you're fucking
I guess would you like to break down the next 20 minutes of our discussion into kind of talking about just going through each character one by one?
I agree.
And then we can kind of touch on how it hits the whole as we go. Would you be cool with that?
I think that's I think it's the best way to digest this.
Okay, cool. So like first I want to let's start off with kind of like the prologue. This is one of my criticisms. Like I don't think everything in the prologue works for me, and this plus another scene in the film was a weird point where I almost wanted the film in book form, where I just wanted to like highlight stuff and like pause and like it was going so by so quickly. But the part about the dude throwing himself off the building, and technically it's the shot from the mother that kills him. It was so entertaining. But a lot of that prologue maybe felt a tad bit heavy-handed, but overall it was quite funny and entertaining.
Okay. I think the prologue, as an independent piece of like filmmaking and as a sort of framing device, I wonder if it could have been left out, because I think there's something so charming about it, but at the same time, just if you're talking, I feel actually, I don't know, I feel like with films people constantly talk about like what needs to be there, and it's like it's just art. Like I know we're reviewing this, we're trying to subjectively come to some form of like what level of good is this, but at the same time I just really like that it's there. I think it's this really like sweet grounding little thing at the beginning that just kind of I think it's quite important for it framing the film as a cohesive whole as well. Like I think it is like very helpful at keeping you going through all 3 hours, going, okay, why are we getting these 8 different characters all at the same time? I think, and I quite respect I really respect it when filmmakers come through and just very directly say, this is what it's about, and here we go. Like I think another film that does that really well, which we talked before, is The Devil's Backbone. The Devil's Backbone is just so explicitly about what it's about from the beginning, and I love that about it.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I guess my only criticism of the prologue, and I agree with what you're saying, I like how it tongue-in-cheek way of telling you, hey, I'm a film that knows I'm a film, but films are about things, and there's a reason things happen in films. And there's some great lines from Philip Seymour Hoffman later on. Oh, it's such a great scene.
I love that scene so much.
But I guess my only gripe is I'm so infatuated with the part where the narrator clearly becomes obsessed with the story about God, isn't it fucked up that this kid like kills himself, but technically it was a murder because he would have lived, and it does all like drawing a diagram on this kid. And I just wish the other 2 stories that were told were like as interesting or cohesive as that one. I would have loved it if it kind of rattled 3 stories as compelling as that. But hey, we're running low on time, so I'm going to call this part 1. We've covered the preamble, the history, the prologue, and we've got like 40 or so minutes. So we'll just jump into part 2. So catch us next week. We're going to talk about. We're going to run through the film itself, the main plot lines, and
Thank you so much for listening. See you there. Bye.
See you next week.